Okay, and we'll send a link once it's all recorded. So my name is Michelle Calderon. I'm the Vice President of our Mid-Atlantic AMAR Supporter Circle. And we're so excited that everyone's here or watching, if you're watching not live. I'm going to go ahead and post in the chat our agenda for today so you can see what the plan is. We hope to make it about an hour long. So that's what we're planning to do if you want to follow along. I just wanted to make a few introductions. Of course, we have to introduce the Baroness Emma Nicholson of Winterbourne, the founder of AMAR, who's on. Thank you for being on. And also Andrew Methvin is on, who's the Chief of Staff of AMAR. And so is Chris Frost, who is the treasurer. Welcome, everybody. And Chris and the Baroness will be speaking to us. Also on the call is our small but mighty Mid-Atlantic Supporter Circle team, our board, Jim Olson as the president, Desiree Mortensen and Carolyn Melby, and Star is logging on. She'll be on in just a minute. So that's our team of people that have put this together today. And also on the call is a very important person, David Kirkham, who is the co-author of a book that's being published along with the Windsor Dialogue Conference. He and Brett Scharfs are the co-editors of the book and co-authors of one of the main chapters in the book, which we'll talk about that in a few minutes. He's one of our speakers today. And Kent Bowman, who is representing the Utah Friends of AMAR, who's our 501c3 organization that supports the international work of AMAR. Kent is representing there because the president, Stan, is having a medical procedure, so he's not able to be on today. So welcome everybody. We're excited that everyone's here. Welcome everyone who I didn't name as well. We hope that you'll enjoy this hour with us. We're going to start with Chris Frost. You know, the reason why we're on is to tell you all about the Windsor Dialogue Conference, which is an international conference that was started by the Baroness to support the idea of religious tolerance across the world, noting that religious persecution is a main driver of forced migration or forced displacement. She started this conference to try to help spread awareness, educate people, and bring action around this issue. So before we talk about the conference, though, we wanted to give a little bit of background about AMAR, the international charity that she founded. So that's what Chris is going to do. So I'll go ahead and turn the time over to Chris. Thank you for being with us. He's the treasurer of AMAR International.
Hi, I hope you can see the screen I'm sharing.
Yes, we can.
My brief is to spend 10 minutes taking you through 30 years of history. So I might skip over some things quickly, but dwell on others a little bit more slowly. So I'm going to talk a little bit about AMAR's history, the challenges we face in Iraq. A lot of our work is done in Iraq, so I'm going to talk about Iraq and explain why help is needed. And then go into a bit more detail about the kind of work that we do and the areas in which we're constantly looking for funding. AMAR was established in 1991. Nearly 30 years ago now. Originally, after work was done in refugee camps in Iran, which were helping Iraqis who were escaping from Saddam Hussein. AMAR is not just based in Iraq, it's worked all over, but its goal is to help individuals and communities affected by conflict, civil disorder, or natural disasters.
Yeah, I just sent you a new Zoom link because some of them couldn't get in on that. Look at.
So say again.
It's okay. Keep going.
Okay. AMAR is currently registered to operate in Iraq, both in the south and in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, and most recently Somaliland. Our model is quite unique for not-for-profits like us operating in countries like Iraq, our team in country is all made up of local people. We don't hire expats to work full-time in Iraq. The team from London does go out from time to time to meet the team and occasionally to monitor the work, but we employ local doctors, nurses, teachers, managers. We don't subcontract out to third parties unless it's for construction work, which I'll come on to. And we have a strong focus on professional development of those doctors, nurses, and teachers. And we believe this is a very strong, sustainable model. The role of the office in London is to provide oversight of the work, financial management, fundraising, and any other kind of support that's needed. We have very low administration costs so that 90% of the monies that we collect from donors ends up in the field. So the London office fluctuates between about 9 and 10%. Our patron is Prince Charles. I'll leave you a couple of seconds to read his words if you can make them out. But he's been a very strong supporter of AMAR for nearly 30 years now. In terms of governance, we have a board of trustees in London, a London-based management team, which is now augmented by 2 managers, one based in Jordan, who has a lot of UN experience, and an Iraqi who's based in Erbil in the north of Iraq. We also have external auditors, both in London and in Iraq, covering our work in Iraq. We have an internal auditor who monitors our controls on a day-to-day basis. And from time to time, we get audits from our donors. We've had audits from UNDP, from UNESCO, and most recently by BP, who are one of our big donors in Iraq. The governance has to be strong because Iraq is a very challenging country to work in. Over the years, we've had partnerships with many international institutions, including the World Bank, the WHO, UNESCO. We work very closely in country with national, local government and tribal leaders. Without the support of the communities, it would be very difficult for us to operate in Iraq. We also work very closely with ministries, including the Ministries of Health, Education, Higher Education, Justice, Human Rights, and their local partners in each region. We've also had partnerships with universities in the UK, US, and Iraq. And we have had very strong partnerships with corporates, including Zain Iraq, Shell Iraq, BP, and the Olive Group. Over the years, we've had a long list of institutional partners, a long list of corporates, and we also have strong support from private individuals, some of whom have been able to give very large amounts of money, and some have given very small amounts of money, but it all helps. Our challenges in Iraq are many. Most recently, we've been affected by COVID, as everyone can imagine. We're also affected by the fact that the financial services available in Iraq are very primitive. Banking is 30, 40 years behind the West in terms of electronic banking, even opening bank accounts. It's hard for some of our staff to open bank accounts. We can't open a bank account in Iraqi dinar. We can only open a bank account in dollars. Corruption is a massive problem. Iraq is the 162nd out of 180 most corrupt countries in the world. Its government is corrupt. Its officials are corrupt. It's almost a way of life in Iraq, which many parties have been trying to change, but we have to live in a world that is corrupt. It is incredibly bureaucratic. which is 156 worst out of 189 countries in terms of bureaucracy. Funding is difficult because it's not popular, even for the big international institutions. Money instead goes to places like Syria, where refugees are getting between 20 and 12 times more money from international institutions than people living in tents in Iraq. The infrastructure of the country was damaged during 30 years of war and hasn't yet been repaired. It's pretty shabby. So electricity is on and off. Civil unrest is an ongoing problem. ISIS has been beaten as a military force, but still conducts operations against international bodies. There are militia operating against international bodies and against themselves. So it is a very challenging country to operate in. There are something like 8.7 million people in Iraq living on $2.5 or less dollars a day in abject poverty. There's still 1.6 million people living in tents, in camps. Society is very badly served by government. So social security is minimal. Education and health systems are falling apart. The GDP of the country is relatively high. It's a middle-income country. But the problem with Iraq is there is a small number of incredibly wealthy people and a very large number of people who have very little. What do we do? Primary healthcare. It's been a big focus for many years, and we operate both in the south and in the north, running clinics which are delivering healthcare to families, to men, women, and children, some of whom are living in tents. We have mobile clinics that wander around the country supporting communities which don't have access to mobile clinics. We have networks of women health volunteers who teach basic sanitation, basic healthcare, contraception, and so on. They've conducted something like 3 million home visits since 2002. We are involved in adult education. The guys in yellow are prisoners who are being taught to read and write, which will help prevent them reoffend in the future. We also teach human rights and the rule of law, democracy, political participation, and religious tolerance. We also are involved in the education of children, be it refurbishing schools or actually getting involved in setting schools up and running them so that kids get a proper education. We also do vocational training to get people back in work. Business IT, English language, sewing, welding, which is particularly helpful in the south where the oil companies are doing a lot of work. Food preparation, hairdressing, which has enabled widows to go out and set up businesses to keep themselves earning money and feeding their families. We've also been involved in infrastructure projects. We have refurbished and rebuilt something like 75 health clinics, 85 educational facilities since 2003, most of which we've handed back to the government. We also have implemented clean water programs to give people in their homes better sanitation facilities and clean water to drink. At the moment, we're looking for funding for a hospital, we're looking for funding for our clinics, and we're looking for funding to keep the overall charity operating. Over the years, we've worked all over Iraq, in the north, in the middle, and in the south. At the moment, we have a lot of projects in the south region, a lot of stuff up in the north, and a few projects in Baghdad in the middle. I'm now going to hand over to the Baroness, who's going to talk about some of the other work we do in mental health and music. Emma.
Thank you very much. Jim, if you're comfortable, I will move on to the next phase of your agenda. Is that acceptable to you?
I would love
Yes.
to introduce you just for a second, briefly. I mean, I think you don't really need much of an introduction, but Chris, do you want to still share your screen through her presentation?
No, I'll stop sharing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, though, Chris. We appreciate that context. So one of the questions that I've heard people ask is, how is this Windsor Dialogue Conference connected to the work of AMAR, besides the Baroness having founded it? Well, one of the things is that in Iraq, there's an ethno-religious minority that's highly persecuted, the Yazidis, that the Baroness, we'll talk about, I'm sure, but AMAR serves the Yazidi people that are living in camps after they experienced a brutal genocide at the hands of the Islamic State. And so having seen them be persecuted because of their deeply held beliefs, that led to the idea of having a conference that supports the idea of religious tolerance across the world. So the Baroness is going to speak, obviously, to us next. And thank you for being with us. She has a biography that's 5 pages long, so I won't spend the time to tell you all about her, but I will link to it in the chat, so you can click on it and go read the amazing things that she's done. Most notably for this conversation is founding AMAR to help the Iraqi people, but also founding the Windsor Dialogue Conference. So thank you for being with us, and we'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a very great pleasure to be with you this evening, or this morning, your time. I'm moving on from Chris Frost's wonderful exposition of what we as a team together, all of us, have been doing for the persecuted people. I now move on to the core of the problem, which is the continuation of religious persecution. I remember, I think it was Churchill who talked about the little platoons. And I would suggest that as far as religious persecution is concerned, first of all, that our research has shown that the bulk of persecution, to the extent we've witnessed it, is based on religious reasons. So it can be called religious persecution. Most of the persecution that is really massive is in that sense religious persecution. And secondly, I would say that the big ships, the huge fleets, haven't resolved it. Religious persecution goes on day after day, night after night, week after week, somewhere around the world, and always in more than one place. So the big battalions haven't succeeded in eliminating or stopping it, and certainly they haven't succeeded in bringing the victims, the survivors, back to life again. So we are, if you like it, what I think Churchill called the little platoons. And we're coming at it slightly differently. We're deeply committed. And I think we feel that we have some answers. And although they're not huge answers, we think these may actually somehow move the whole puzzle a little bit and be very different. You can see behind my head a little bit of one of the enormous refugee camps that our friends the Yazidis are living in. We help 1 or 2, according to the funding, as a group together, a canker camp, and we focus on public health and education, as Chris has explained. Now, going through religious persecution, we've been looking at it for several years in what we call the Windsor Dialogue, and we've had incredible brains on it, including Elder Holland, of course, including Sharon Eubank, including all sorts of people. And LDS itself, to whom we were introduced by Jim, himself, our chair today, we've been doing this in partnership together. I would suggest that we've uncovered three phases of any genocide. First of all, there are the assaults. There is a build-up to the assaults, but nobody seems to notice. And if they do notice, I raised the Yazidi one very early on in House of Commons and globally, but nobody took notice. How the build-up seems not to attract attention internationally until the assaults happen. By that time, the assaults are unstoppable. They are a cataclysm of horror, terror, cruelty, torment, deaths, torture, unbelievable things that humans have done to other humans in such a cataclysm. It is true, our analysis shows, that if people realized the build-up was happening or were willing to accept that the build-up was happening, then these assaults could be modified, could be muted, could even be occasionally diverted. But that is not happening. The world refuses to notice and pick up the build-up. Why? In my view, because it would mean they would have to do something. So we have the cataclysm, we have the assaults, we have the actual persecution in action. The phase after that is when it's a little calmer, when perhaps the bulk of the assaults have passed by, when there may have been some intervention internationally. UN, other, our sides, our two sides, for example. And we're left then in the middle phase with the survivors not knowing if it's going to happen again, and it very likely does. There's a little bit of semi-calmness, and then you find the survivors are in camps. They've lost their homes, they've lost their future, they've lost their families. They're either in camps under the UN or they're squatting. And you find that there's no recompense, and effectively, you've lost 1, 2, or sometimes 3 or more generations of human beings, most wrongly and unfairly. And then we have the final phase, which is the extremely limited restoration, where these people will go, what they're to do, and so on and so forth. And the restoration is very limited, largely because the middle phase, the international community gets bored. It feels it's done it. It passes on to the next one. So we're talking in our next phase of the Windsor Dialogue, which we're in now, we're talking about where we can intervene and help. What can be done that would enable the survivors, if we can't stop the genocide, which would enable the survivors to have a life ahead. And that's why we've been working so hard in the camps, in the precincts of the camps with the squatters. And this enormous number of people have been revived by us. Chris Frost mentioned health. And of course, our core element is public health and education. But public health is just not just physical. Public health is also mental health. And we think in order to make lasting change, we need to bring that thing right up to the surface and make the UN and others see that it's just as important for the recovery of others as physical health. So this year, in our Windsor Dialogue, we are focusing what I would call the recovery of belief. Because when you land up as a victim of religious persecution, as you very well know in earlier generations in your lives, I do also, we do over here for different reasons in our generations, the recovery of belief in anything at all is one of the most difficult things. The recovery of belief in the Almighty, the recovery of belief that you can trust another human being, the recovery of belief that you have anything to offer, any skills, any gifts, any worth. The recovery of yourself, your identity, is, I think, can be framed within the concept of the recovery of belief. And of course, most of the world worships, so it's recovery of belief in the Almighty, in whatever way your particular part of the world looks at that. So this time, we are pulling together our findings of the last 3 times, which are outstanding, one half of it is going into the book. Because during the Windsor Dialogue, we've identified a number of different persecutions, religious persecutions, and BYU has pulled out a number of those and is doing different chapters on them. So they are focusing, refining on what we've offered earlier. We on our side of the fence, who are not the academics, we are producing a report and we are producing something else as well. We think that music is at the heart of the recovery of belief. You know that because of our amazing choir, and we have found that in the camps. So we have been training up the Yazidi young to remember to begin again their own music. They have 3 different sorts of music, are very interesting indeed, and it's unique music. There's nothing quite like it because they are a unique community. And the middle music is the music that is the country music, the agricultural music, the farming music, and the folk music. The one closest to that is the music that they provide when somebody dies, for funerals, when somebody's born, for the new baby, and for the weddings. And then there is the extreme religious music, which is very beautiful and very special. And that is the music that the ISIL people, ISIS, were trying to wipe out because it's held in the heads of the priests. And there are now, I think, less than 10 priests left because ISIS went for them to wipe them out. And of course, it's never been notated before. It's never been notated, never been written down. They had 1 or 2 rather fragmentary recordings, not very good ones, of a few bits and pieces of their music. And so in AMAR, what we've done together is we have found a musician who's been out there and has recorded all of their religious music for them. It belongs to them. And we have placed it in the Bodleian Library so that if they have another assault, which looks very likely at some point in the future, their music will actually be truly safe, not just in the north of Iraq, but it is also now in Oxford University in the Bodleian Library. So we have that music for them now. And last summer, we brought the choir over, our AMAR Yazidi choir, and they worked mightily for 2 or 3 days. And this year, when we have our Windsor Dialogue, 21st, 22nd, 23rd of June in Cumberland Lodge, in Windsor Great Park, when we're going to be discussing this and moving ahead, we hope to have them with us again. And in the meantime, they will be doing more work, they've been practicing, and they will provide some more of their wonderful music and dancing. In order finally to make lasting change, which is what we all seek to do, to try to modify the outcomes of religious persecution at the very least, if not more, to try to restore the victims to a proper life ahead, to allow them to believe in humanity, in the world, in the future, to allow them to have a future at all. That's what we're after doing. And so this year, we're going to focus very much on the actual practical outcomes we can do. And it's hard to change the globe, as you know. And one big instrument is the United Nations. And it takes years or decades to make any change in the United Nations. I've been having a look at what we could get done. And they have physical health, public health, built in since 1951 with the Geneva Convention for Refugees and Displaced People. And so they have already got health obligation for the UN Secretary General and the whole of the UN in there. When people are attacked, when they have to flee, when they become refugees, the United Nations has the utter obligation of providing public health. Now that gives us, I think, our opening in that we can go and say to the Director General, look here, that's fine, but you haven't really been focusing on mental health. And on mental health, we believe you should bring in faith, We should bring in a reality about the knowing that people worship and they must have the opportunity to do so and to revive their faith again, that they must be allowed, therefore, to do music in camps, to have dancing in camps and movement and so on. In other words, we think we could highlight within the existing regulations of the UN something they should focus on and something which would make a huge difference globally. Many of us have visited refugee camps many, many times, and we know the utter misery, the gloom, the silence, the sort of lack of anything at all in there. It's not been possible, and sometimes people have to spend 11 years in a camp, if not more. So we think by focusing on this and taking the opportunity of making lasting change to our parliaments, yours, mine, to the African Union, to the European Union, there are various big blocks that we can influence if we get our little puzzle straight and offer something doable and achievable that will actually have an impact. So we think first year students at university internationally would be very interested in this before they got locked into the huge cycle they have of examinations. So we want to focus on first year students in universities globally, and then the other age level who I'm sure will be very interested, and we could link them in electronically, are young children, maybe age 7, 9, 10. I'm sure they would be very enthusiastic. So we're going to find practical things for people to do, which will make all the difference. So forgive me talking for rather long, but religious persecution is a subject that is monstrously important. All of us would have hoped in earlier years that religious persecution would have stopped. Tragically, it's not only not stopped, it's gone on just the same all the time in different parts of the world. Those of us who travel, you do, we see the outcomes, we see the continuing misery of utterly ruined lives for no purpose at all. What have these poor people done? And we want to find a way of somehow picking up those bits and bringing people right back to be normal again, as normal as they possibly can be. And I think you in the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, you've shown the way, you've shown that this is possible. You've broken through against the persecution, you've come right back to life again, and you're healthy, hearty, hale, and in the middle of everything. So this is one massively good example. Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you for your early introduction 9 years ago, when we all started to make friends and decided that we could make change. So we need to make more change. Thank you.
Thank you, Baroness. That was wonderful. I'm sure people have questions, but I'd like to go have David Kirkham speak, and then if you have questions, if you could post them in the chat, and then when David's finished, maybe we can have a little bit of Q&A. So let me just introduce David really quickly. He is working on a book that she mentioned that's going to be published hopefully after the conference or during the conference. And he is the co-editor of the book. And he's also a co-author of a chapter that focuses on the Latter-day Saint experience going from, well, he can talk about it, but he's co-authoring and co-editing with Brett Scharfs, who's the Rex Ely Chair and Professor of Law at BYU, and also the Director of the International Center for Law and Religious Studies at BYU. David Kirkham, though, recently retired as the academic director and as a professor at the BYU London Center, where his focus was human rights with an emphasis on freedom of conscience and religion. He has worked closely with AMAR since the first Windsor Conference in 2016 and continues now as a senior fellow at the International Center for Law and Religious Studies at the BYU Law School. I'm going to post his entire biography from the BYU Law School in our chat so you can read more about him. So I can yield the time to him so he can talk about this book that's coming from the conference. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, David.
Thank
For
you.
being with us.
Thank you, Michelle, and thanks to all of you. I hope you can hear me well. I don't get a chance on these Zoom things to get that kind of feedback, but it's always a pleasure to hear Baroness Nicholson. A pleasure. I never get tired of hearing her talk about the vision of AMAR and this project. It's been my pleasure to work with AMAR now for almost 5 years, and the people there, Chris Frost and Andrew Methven and others, have just been some of the most dedicated people of good and influence that I've had a privilege to work with. One of the things that delights me about this, I started out my career many years ago, probably 35 years ago, doing academic things on studying about revolutions and constitutions. And then eventually my interest in the rule of law turned to a study of war crimes. That expanded to human rights in general, and then it kind of focused again in about 2007 when I came to the BYU Law School to an emphasis on freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and belief. So I've been dabbling in, well, I won't say dabbling in, I've actually been immersed in human rights for many years now, and really interested in the religious freedom aspect of that for a long time. But the reason I'm telling you that is the opportunity that we have right now in working on this particular book and working with AMAR is that we get to, I hope, make a book that will make a difference. I found throughout a career, one of the blessings that I've been able to have is that I've alternated between academic work and then sometimes international negotiations and what I call real world work. And what I find for me personally works best is I'll be doing something academic for a few years, and then after a while, I just get frustrated and I say, enough talk, get out there and do something. And then I try and get out there and do something and give myself to some good cause. And then after a couple of years, I'm saying, now, why am I doing this again? And I have to go back and think about it again and write. And so to be able to alternate like that is really important to me. One of the interesting things about AMAR, the Windsor Dialogue, and this whole project from the very beginning is it brings together the thinkers, the writers, the teachers with the real world practitioners. And so we end up with a collection of leaders, practitioners, and academics in government, religion, education, business, and the arts, because each one of the institutions that they represent has made either a contribution towards the end of religious persecution or, sadly enough, sometimes contributed to religious persecution in particular countries at a particular time. I give really, I think, Emma credit for the inspiration behind this book. I'm not sure what everything went into whatever inspired her on this, but I think some of this, I saw the seeds of it at the first Windsor conference when Elder Holland was speaking, and Elder Holland told the story. He was asked by Baroness Nicholson to tell the story of the Latter-day Saint expulsion from the eastern United States until they ended up in the deserts of Utah, and that whole story. And at the end of his telling the story of the Latter-day Saint experience, one of the comments that Emma made, and I've heard her come back to this a number of times, is that Latter-day Saints did not call themselves victims. They called themselves pioneers. And they found a way to take this persecution that they had been victims of and turn it into opportunity. And I heard her say at the time that this, and I think other experiences of other people's as well, gave her the thought that we need to help reach out to the communities that are experiencing persecution and try to help them see what opportunities they might be able to bring out of the difficult times that they've all gone through. So the purpose of the book, it's going to be a scholarly book, although we hope there will be follow-ups later on that will allow a broader public, broader reading and thinking and caring public to engage in these. But the idea is that the book is going to explore ways out of persecution. So it's going to start historically, and it's going to look at some of those communities in the world in the last couple of centuries that have found their way from a situation where they were a persecuted people to eventually be an accepted people. The working title of the book is From Persecution to Inclusion, the Ongoing Journeys of Religious Communities from Oppression to Acceptance. Now, the book will be divided up into 3 parts. Those parts will include at first we were just going to try and gather all examples of religious communities who had gone through persecution and then come out all right on the other end of it. And sadly, we couldn't find enough of those examples to fill the book. And then the more we thought about it and put our heads together on that, we thought, well, that's not the only thing that would be helpful anyway. We need to look at groups that are in various stages of this, including some that are currently undergoing terrible persecution in the world, and bring them all together into one conceptual viewpoint. So the first part of the book is going to be some of those who have gone through the process and have come out more or less okay. And so part 1, Journeys from Persecution to Inclusion, is going to include the story of Roman Catholics in the United States, Huguenots in France and England, Jehovah's Witnesses and members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in America, the European Jewish experience. And each of these is going to be written by eminent scholars, highly respected scholars in their fields who have expertise on each of these subjects. Part 2 is going to look at unfinished journeys. And the focus there is from civil war to peace processes. And we'll look at countries where there has been some kind of a formal conclusion to a conflict period. And yet the cultural conclusions have not yet completely caught up with the formal conclusions. So this would include Sri Lanka, Northern Ireland, and Bosnia. And yet, again, I guess I should mention, the group of scholars we have on this is a very international group. For those, for example, we have scholars from England and the Middle East, Northern Ireland, and from Croatia that will be working on those chapters. The final part of the narratives, at least, is going to be the navigating the journey for some of those who are still going through this. This would include in Myanmar, the Rohingya and Kachin people, in Pakistan, the Ahmadiyas, Russia, Jehovah's Witnesses, Iraq, the Yazidis, key to all of this and key to the inspiration in this, in Iran, the Baha'is. And then we'll do something with China, a challenge for many sensitive reasons, possibly North Korea, and looking at global Christian minorities. And then there will be a conclusion that hopes to find patterns in those groups that have been more or less successful in coming out of persecution, and see if there are actually some principles that might apply to others. The general, and I am wrapping up here, the general format for the chapters will be to look at various institutions, government, religion, education, media, and the arts, business, and then just people's neighbors. Look at those in every society and say, how did these institutions contribute to the original persecution? And then how did each of these institutions make a contribution to pulling these countries out of, or these communities out of persecution? I'll conclude with this. I was reading not long ago from Elie Wiesel, who many of you will recognize as Nobel Peace Prize winner and a survivor of World War II concentration camps. He was talking to a woman from Zimbabwe. And I see this as a good expression of what I feel is inspiration for the book. He said, you must tell your story. This is because if even one person learns from it how to be more human, you will have made your memories into a blessing. We must turn our suffering into a bridge so that others might suffer less. He also said the challenge of our generation of survivors was what would we do with our memories? Would we allow them to drown us in despair, or would they somehow give us the strength to respond to other people's suffering? We're hoping that this book will not just be a scholarly book that gets put on the shelf or is only read or is only read by a handful of like-minded scholars, but that it will be a book that will inspire and in a practical way give helps as to how to help these communities out of persecution today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Wonderful. We do, that puts into context. I wanted to just repeat something that he said in the beginning that I think is really poignant when we're talking about this, is that this Windsor Dialogue connects scholars with religious leaders, with government officials, with practitioners in the field, so that they can all, it's not just one aspect of it. It's people who think about it with people who act on these things so that they can support people who have been displaced due to a well-founded fear of persecution based on their deeply held beliefs. And I think that's a really exciting and important part of this Windsor Dialogue Conference. And this is the part that I personally am attracted to and that makes me want to be involved. I hope that you felt something too when you heard the Baroness and Chris and David speak about these things and are wondering now what you can do to help. So keep that in your mind for just a second. I do want to turn to these questions for just a minute, just to bring them to light from the chat. There's a couple questions about students. When the Baroness talked about students, what the expectation there, or if there are ideas for how they can be involved in this. Is that the purpose of the conference, or do we have that worked out before the conference? Emma, do you want to take that one? I wonder if she heard me. Chris, is that something maybe you could address, or Andrew even?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I was trying to look at the chat.
Yes, I can. There's a couple questions about, so she talked about students, involving students and engaging first-year university students in this work. And a couple people are asking how that's done. And is that something we are prepared to talk about now, or is that one of the purposes of the conference to discuss how to engage university students?
So we have certainly.
Michelle, do you want me to answer any questions?
Yes, that would be
Sorry.
wonderful. Did you hear that? Did you hear the question?
Would you like me to answer any of the questions? Yes, absolutely. Sorry to keep you waiting.
That's okay.
First of all, supporting all the points that David made. We're bringing together this year academia and practicalities. And the first point is that, as I'm sure Caroline Melby will endorse, the thing that people in trouble, people who've been abused, need more than anything else is public health, to which we want the UN to think more firmly about mental health. So one of the big issues we've discovered in studying people who have been persecuted is they are alone. They feel very alone, huge loneliness, practical loneliness, because they will have lost a lot of their family, more likely. They will have lost their neighborhood. They will have lost their home, their street. They will have lost their belonging. They will have lost who they are. And that's where we feel that we'll explore ideas for first-year students. Now, electronically, of course, we can all get in touch with most people globally. So I'm not suggesting we're thinking of everybody jumping on an aeroplane, but actually we want to work up a little mechanism whereby we can tackle aloneness, loneliness. And our focal point is refugee camps. Why? Because in refugee camps, there is accessibility, electronically and other in that sense. And in refugee camps, the UN has obligations. The UN's not very good at fulfilling those obligations because the member states have not been all that effective. But we think we can jack that up. We think we can, by focusing more attention, particularly first-year students. There's only about 62 million people in refugee camps. Well, if we can't manage to connect with them, then I would be very surprised indeed. Some refugee camps, like the Uyghurs, for example, are completely inaccessible. There are some awful things going on where the authorities concerned are not willing to accept the UN anyway. So we can't be hopeful about getting outside the UN circuit. So the focal point is to try to see how we can jack up the UN effectiveness in public health, which is weak, but at least it is in their rule book that they have to do it for at least a decade, and find ways, which won't be too difficult, of making them focus much more on mental health. So the object is to stop people feeling and actually being completely isolated. And our big thread in that is to be music. Music encompasses the globe. Everyone at every single age loves music of different sorts. So that's what we were thinking on that. And that's where we thought the younger generation, the youngest generation, the 7 to 10-year-olds might have ideas themselves as to how they could connect with other children of that age in refugee camps. So in coming together at Windsor, before then, we will have our report out to match David's and Brett's book. So we'll have two things to consider and different lots of people there to think about it. But we will also come with pre-circulated ideas as to the practical ways which we think we could actually manage to achieve. They must be very, very few and extremely simple so that we can somehow find a way of sweeping the globe to make them enfold refugees from religious persecution, as opposed to turning their backs, leaving them alone, feeling guilty about it for a short time, and moving on to something else. So practical action combined with a lot of deep thought that is already taking place.
Thank you. Wonderful. I think so. I have copied these questions. One thing I'll tell everyone is that we are working on a website. In the coming weeks, we'll have something out that will have more information that explains a lot of these things. And I'm going to take these questions into account as we put the final touches on the website. And we'll send everyone on this call the link to the website so you can go on and learn more. I hope that during this call, for the sake of time, we won't address any more questions though, but thank you everyone for being willing to. While we're still on, just for the last few minutes, we wanted to have Jim Olson, who's the president of our Mid-Atlantic Supporters Circle, talk about a fundraising campaign. So this is where hopefully all of us will feel like we can be involved, is to help put our support into the dialogue so that we can bring to pass these great aims and visions and goals of the conference. So I'm going to turn the time over for 5 minutes to Jim to tell us about our fundraising goal and talk to you about that. Jim, you're muted. Yep, you're muted. There you go.
Is that better? Thank you. First of all, my goodness, to have so many wonderful people on this call, so appreciative of that. And Michelle being such a wonderful moderator for us today. Whenever I make a little talk about AMAR and some of the things that have happened over the past 10 years, I always make the point that Emma Nicholson is sort of a blend between a Margaret Thatcher, who, by the way, she was a vice chair for Margaret Thatcher. But she's a blend of a Margaret Thatcher and a Mother Teresa. So her political clout and her mind and her heart for humanitarian causes are amazing. That political clout gives her an opportunity to make changes and make things happen and develop policy that none of the rest of us will ever have that opportunity to do. So that's the beauty of AMAR, as I've watched over the years, our opportunity to make a difference, And we're excited about the things we heard from her today about the recovery of beliefs and about words to actions and some getting down to practicalities of how we can make a difference. I'm going to be really brief. We are committed, our little group back here, our circle, we call it AMAR circle back here. We're nothing official about us, just a bunch of volunteers that are given so much time and time that they don't have. We work under and with the Utah Friends of AMAR, headed up by Stan Parrish and his good wife, and a great team out there. And you'll hear from Kent in just a minute. He's going to talk to you a little bit more about that. But I just want to say this, today is Giving Tuesday. I'm pleased to say I already have here a donation for $2,500 for someone that couldn't be on the call today. I also have an opportunity here for a matching opportunity of someone willing to donate $5,000. It will be matched by someone. So it's Giving Tuesday. You won't find in my view anyway, a greater cause to help AMAR. This conference, I think, is going to be the culmination of some wonderful things that will lead to some true policy changes and also betterment in those refugee camps. We just hope today that you'll use your span of influence. You know, people in their hearts that want to give, and they want to know how to give and how to help the world, help these refugees. So please take that opportunity. Michelle is recording this, so you can use that. We hope to have a trifold or a brochure, a piece of paper we can to people. I hope, again, we'll have another one of these Zoom conferences, maybe later in January, and by then we'll have a report to Emma that we're well on our way to raising that $60,000 that the Mid-Atlantic Circle committed to raise. So with that, I'd really like to turn the time over to Kent, Michelle, if you want to introduce him a little bit. I know we're running a little long here, but I just want to thank everyone. Open your hearts and open your pocketbook to the extent you can. And also, those of you that are interested in coming next year, you'll hear more about it, but we need to make up that list and get that to Emma so because so that she can have a look at some of the folks back here that would like to come. The problem is the capacity at the Cumberland Lodge on the Windsor Great Park is only about 50 people or so. So we'll look to that in the future, who might be interested in attending this conference. And with that, Kent, unless Michelle, you want to introduce him a little bit, I'm sorry.
Well, I think I did a little bit earlier. He's the treasurer of our Utah Friends of AMAR, which is the 501c3 that you can donate to get the tax donation that goes with contributing to AMAR International. And so I'll let Kent talk about that. And I'm also going to post in the chat the address if you'd like to write a check. I'll post into the chat.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure for me to be on this call with all of you. I share this vision of the importance of what AMAR is all about and taking care of these individuals that are struggling so significantly. I spent a couple of years in Iran, not Iraq, but in Iran as a missionary, and watched, right before my eyes, the religious persecution that was taking place with the Baha'is. And it was dramatic. It kind of tore at the heartstrings. And you see what these people in Iraq, the Yazidis in particular, are facing, and it is dramatic. So it's a great honor for me to be involved in this, working with Stan Parrish and others on the executive committee here at Utah Friends of AMAR is a great blessing for me. I wanted all of you to know that we are encouraged and by the, I don't know what the right word to use is, but by the excitement and the willingness of this group in the Mid-Atlantic to step up and do what you're doing. We appreciate that dramatically. And the reasons we have the monies flow through Utah Friends of AMAR is simply because we have that 501c3 organization set up that we can then flow those monies to London and allow for those tax deductions to take place. So in hindsight, maybe we shouldn't have used that name of Utah Friends of AMAR because it's not exclusive to Utah, but that is the way it was set up and is in existence now. But we've been thrilled to see the donations come from constituents of yours back there. Just as a little bit of history, since organizing this group, a little over, maybe about a year and a half ago now, we've been able to raise over $500,000 in donations in a very difficult time, with majority of that time being in the COVID era. And we are so much looking forward to being able to do much more active fundraising, in-person events, etc. once we get past this virus. But in the meantime, what little amounts that we can generate, we hope to make those bigger and bigger amounts. All those we talk to around this part of the world are excited about what they can do and what we can do. And similar to what was said by Chris Frost earlier, the amount of money we use in overhead, if you will, here in Utah Friends of AMAR is negligible. It's about 1%. So everything we're doing is essentially completely volunteer. We have a few costs we have to incur with outside specialists, but nothing of significance. And so literally here, 99% of every dollar we can raise gets to the field. So just on behalf of Stan Parish, I want to thank all of you for your interest in this and your diligence and your tremendous generosity. And we pledge here as well to keep this work going forward and supporting the Baroness and all that she's doing, and obviously what a tremendous leader she is for us to have involved. So that's all I have. Thank you very much for all you're doing.
Thanks, Kent.
Great, thank you, everybody. Okay, that's our presentation today. Thank you for being on. We are excited that all of you could be here, or if you're watching separately, that's wonderful. Thank you, Baroness, for explaining. Thank you, Chris, for explaining the work of AMAR. Thank you, David, for telling us about the book. And we hope everyone will feel like you can be part of this, and contact the person who invited you to this meeting if you have questions. And we're all very available. So we are happy to help you if you want to know more details, and look for that link to the website coming in the next few weeks. Thank you, everybody. Happy Giving Tuesday as well. And happy holidays.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Jim.
Bye.
And Mike, you
Thanks
look
all.
great.
Thank you, Kent.
Goodbye. Hope to see you all soon in 2021.
Thank you.
David, great.
Thank you.